The second Turkish president, Mustafa İsmet Inonu, 1923 to 1938. Part 2. However, with France's defeat in June 1940, Inonu abandoned the pro-Allied neutrality that he had followed since the beginning of the war. A major embarrassment for the Turks occurred in July 1940 when the Germans captured and published documents from the Quai d'Orsay in Paris showing the Turks were aware of Operation Pike, as the Anglo-French plan in the winter of 1939-40 to bomb the oil fields in the Soviet Union from Turkey was codenamed, which was intended by Berlin to worsen relations between Ankara and Moscow. In turn, worsening relations between the Soviet Union and Turkey were intended to drive Turkey into the arms of the Reich. After the publication of the French documents relating to Operation Pike, Inonu pulled out of the tripartite pact signed with Britain and France and signed the German-Turkish Treaty of Friendship and the Clodius Agreement, which placed Turkey within the German economic sphere of influence, but Inonu went no further towards the Axis. In the first half of 1941, Germany, which was intent on invading the Soviet Union, went out of its way to improve relations with Turkey as the Reich hoped for benevolent Turkish neutrality when the German-Soviet War began. At the same time, the British had great hopes in the spring of 1941 when they dispatched an expeditionary force to Greece that Inonu could be persuaded to enter the war on the Allied side, as the British leadership had high hopes of creating a Balkan front that would tie down German forces, which thus led to a major British diplomatic offensive with Foreign Secretary Sir Anthony Eden visiting Ankara several times to meet with Inonu. Inonu always told Eden that the Turks would not join the British forces in Greece, and the Turks would only enter the war if Germany attacked Turkey. For his part, Papen offered Inonu parts of Greece if Turkey were to enter the war on the Axis side, an offer Inonu declined. In May 1941, when the Germans dispatched an expeditionary force to Iraq to fight against the British, Inonu refused Papen's request that the German forces be allowed transit rights to Iraq. Another attempt by Hitler to woo Turkey came in February 1943, when Talat Pasha's remains were returned to Turkey for a state burial. Internal opposition to Turkish neutrality came from ultra-nationalist circles and factions of the military that wished to incorporate the Turkic-populated areas of the Soviet Union by allying with Germany. This almost erupted into a coup d'état against the government. Leading pan-Turkists including Alparslan Turks, Nihal Atsiz, and Sayık Gökyay were arrested and sentenced to time in prison in the racism-Tyrannism trials. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill traveled to Ankara in January 1943 for a conference with President Inonu to urge Turkey's entry into the war on the Allied side. Churchill met secretly with Inonu inside a railroad car at the Yanis station near Adana. By the 4th to the 6th of December 1943, Inonu felt confident enough about the outcome of the war that he met openly with Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill at the Second Cairo Conference. Until 1941, both Roosevelt and Churchill thought that Turkey's continued neutrality would serve the interests of the Allies by blocking the Axis from reaching the strategic oil reserves of the Middle East. But the early victories of the Axis up to the end of 1942 caused Roosevelt and Churchill to re-evaluate possible Turkish participation in the war on the side of the Allies. Turkey had maintained a decently sized army and air force throughout the war, and Churchill wanted the Turks to open a new front in the Balkans. Roosevelt, on the other hand, still believed that a Turkish attack would be too risky and an eventual Turkish failure would have disastrous effects for the Allies. Inonu knew very well the hardships that his country had suffered during decades of incessant war between 1908 and 1922 and was determined to keep Turkey out of another war as long as he could. The young Turkish Republic was still rebuilding, recovering from the losses due to earlier wars, and lacked any modern weapons and the infrastructure to enter a war to be fought along and possibly within its borders. Inonu based his neutrality policy during the Second World War on the premise that Western allies and the Soviet Union would sooner or later have a falling out after the war. Thus, Inonu wanted assurances on financial and military aid for Turkey, as well as a guarantee that the United States and the United Kingdom would stand beside Turkey in the event of a Soviet invasion of the Turkish Straits after the war. In August 1944, Inonu broke off diplomatic relations with Germany, and on the 5th of January 1945, Inonu severed diplomatic relations with Japan. Shortly afterwards, Inonu allowed Allied shipping to use the Turkish Straits to send supplies to the Soviet Union, and on the 25th of February 1945, he declared war on Germany and Japan. For this, Turkey became a founding member of the United Nations. The post-war tensions and arguments surrounding the Turkish Straits would come to be known as the Turkish Straits Crisis. The fear of Soviet invasion and Joseph Stalin's unconcealed desire for Soviet military bases in the Turkish Straits eventually caused Turkey to give up its principle of neutrality in foreign relations and join NATO in February 1952. Maintaining an armed neutrality proved to be disruptive for the young republic. The country existed in a practical state of war throughout the Second World War. Military production was prioritized at the expense of peacetime goods, rationing and curfews were implemented, and high taxes were put in place, causing severe economic hardship for many. One such tax was the wealth tax varlık vergisi, a discriminatory tax that demanded very high one-time payments from Turkey's non-Muslim minorities. This tax is seen by many to be a continuation of the jizya tax paid by dhimmis during Ottoman times, or Milli İktisat National Economy economic policy implemented by the Committee of Union and Progress regime 3 decades ago. It was only repealed in 1944 under American and British pressure. A famous story of Inonu happened in a meeting in Bursa for the 1969 general elections. A young man yelled at him, "You let us go without food." Inonu replied to him by saying, "Yes, I let you go without food, but I did not let you become fatherless," implying the death of millions of people from both sides of World War II. For the Kemalists, there was always a desire for Turkey to develop into a democracy. Before the independent group, Ataturk experimented with opposition through the Liberal Republican Party, which lasted 3 months before it had to be shut down when reactionaries threatened to hijack the party. In an opening speech to the Grand National Assembly on the 1st of November 1945, Inonu openly expressed the country's need for an opposition party. He welcomed Celal Bayar establishing the Democrat Party DP, which separated from the CHP. However, due to the anti-communist hysteria brought on by the new Soviet threat, new leftist parties were swiftly banned, and rural development initiatives such as the village institutes and people's rooms were closed. Even with such pressure on the left, Inonu established the Ministry of Labor in 1945 and signed into law important protections for workers. Universities were given autonomy, and Inonu's title of unchangeable chairman of CHP was abolished. Inonu allowed for Turkey's first multi-party elections to be held in 1946. However, the elections were infamously not free and fair. Voting was carried out under the gaze of onlookers who could determine which voters had voted for which parties, and secrecy prevailed as to the subsequent counting of votes. Instead of inviting Shukru Sarıkolu to form another government, he assigned CHP hardliner Recep Peker to the task, who contributed to a polarizing atmosphere in the parliament. Inonu had to act as a mediator several times between Peker and Bayar, who threatened to have the DP walk from parliament if they didn't have some of their demands met, such as ensuring judicial review, secret ballots, and public counting for elections. On the 12th of July 1947, İsmet Inonu gave a speech broadcast on radio and in newspapers that he would stand equal distance from the government and opposition, prompting Peker's resignation. Free and fair national elections had to wait until 1950, and on that occasion, Inonu's government was defeated. In the 1950 election campaign, the leading figures of the Democrat Party used the slogan "Geldi İzmit," Kesildi Kismet İzmit arrived, our fortune left. CHP lost the election with 41% of the vote against DP's 55%, but due to the winner-takes-all electoral system, DP received 85% of the seats in parliament. Inonu presided over the peaceful transfer of power to the DP leaders, Bayar and Adnan Menderes. Bayar would serve as Turkey's third president, and Menderes would be its first prime minister not from the CHP. For 10 years, Inonu served as the leader of the opposition. In opposition, the CHP established its youth and women's branches. On the 22nd of June 1953, the establishment of trade unions and vocational chambers was proposed, and the right to strike for workers was added to the party program. The CHP formed an electoral alliance with the Republican Nation Party and Liberty Party for the 1957 election, which was blocked by the DP government. In the lead-up to the elections prepared for 1960, Inonu and CHP members faced regular harassment from the authorities and DP supporters, to the point where he was almost lynched several times. In 1958, the DP mayor of Zile declared martial law and mobilized the gendarmerie to prevent Inonu from conducting a rally in the city. A similar event happened in the city of Kankiri. In 1959, Inonu began a campaign tour that followed the same path he took 30 years ago as a pasha from Usak to Izmir and ended in victory for the Turkish nationalists. The DP Minister of Interior refused to promise protection to him. In Usak, a crowd blocked Inonu from going to his podium, and he was hit in the head with a stone. Following his great offensive, he flew to Istanbul, where he was almost lynched by a DP-organized mob on the way to Topkapi Palace. He was also banned from speaking in rallies in Kayseri and Yeşilhisar. Inonu was banned from 12 sessions of parliament. This coincided with an authoritarian turn of the Democrat Party, which culminated in a military coup. The Turkish armed forces overthrew the government as a result of the military coup on the 27th of May 1960. After 1 year of junta rule in which the Democrat Party was banned and its top leaders executed in the Yasyada trials, elections were held once the military returned to their barracks. Inonu returned to power as prime minister after the 1961 election, in which the CHP won the election. Right-wing parties have since continuously attacked Inonu and the CHP for their perceived involvement in the hanging of Prime Minister Menderes, even though Inonu advocated for Menderes' pardoning. Inonu's governments were defined by an effort to de-escalate tensions between radical forces in the Turkish army wishing for extended junta rule and former Democrats that wished for amnesty. Inonu's CHP did not gain enough seats in the legislature to win a majority in the elections, so in an effort to create reconciliation, he formed coalition governments with the Neo-Democrat Justice Party, the New Turkey Party and the Republican Villagers Nation Party until 1965. Forming coalitions with DP successor parties, however, provoked radical officers into action. Colonel Talat Aydemir twice attempted to overthrow the government in 1962 and 1963 Turkish coup attempts. Aydemir was later executed for conducting both coups. Aydemir's 1962 coup had the most potential to succeed when Inonu, President Cemal Gürsel and Chief of Staff Cevdet Sunay were held up in Kankaya Mansion by the putschists. Aydemir decided to let the group go, which foiled the coup. While in coalition with the far-right Republican Villagers Nation Party, Inonu renounced the Greco-Turkish Treaty of Friendship of 1930 and took actions against the Greek minority. The Turkish government also strictly enforced a long-overlooked law barring Greek nationals from 30 professions and occupations. For example, Greeks could not be doctors, nurses, architects, shoemakers, tailors, plumbers, cabaret singers, ironsmiths, cooks, tourist guides, etc. And 50,000 more Greeks were deported. These actions were taken because of the growing anti-Greek sentiment in Turkey after the ethnic conflict in Cyprus flared up again. With an invasion of the island imminent, American President Lyndon Johnson sent a memorandum to Inonu, effectively vetoing Turkish intervention. A subsequent meeting at the White House between Inonu and Johnson on the 22nd of June 1964 meant Cyprus' status quo continued for another 10 years. An event a couple years earlier also strained the otherwise amicable relationship Inonu held with Washington, namely the withdrawal of the nuclear-armed PGM-19 Jupiter MRBMs briefly stationed in Turkey, which was undertaken in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. While Washington withdrew the MRBMs, some B-61 nuclear bombs are still stored in Incirlik Air Base. Inonu's governments established the National Security Council, Turkish Statistical Institute, and Turkey's leading research institute, TÜBİTAK. Turkey signed the Ankara Agreement, the first treaty of cooperation with the European Economic Community, and also increased ties with Iran and Pakistan. The army was modernized, and the National Intelligence Organization was founded. Inonu was instrumental in establishing CHP as left of center on the political spectrum as a new left-wing party cadre led by his protege Bülent Ecevit became more influential. Inonu survived an assassination attempt from a Menderes supporter in 1964. Inonu returned to the opposition after losing both the 1965 and 1969 general elections to a much younger man, Justice Party leader Süleyman Demirel. He remained leader of the CHP until 1972, when an inter-party crisis over his endorsement of the 1971 military memorandum led to his defeat by Ecevit in the 5th Extraordinary CHP Convention. This was the first overthrow of a party leader in a leadership contest in the Republic's history. Free and fair national elections had to wait until 1950, and on that occasion, Inonu's government was defeated. In the 1950 election campaign, the leading figures of the Democrat Party used the slogan "Geldi İzmit," "Kesildi Kismet İzmit arrived, our fortune left." CHP lost the election with 41% of the vote against DP's 55%, but due to the winner-takes-all electoral system, DP received 85% of the seats in parliament. Inonu presided over the peaceful transfer of power to the DP leaders, Bayar and Adnan Menderes. Bayar would serve as Turkey's third president, and Menderes would be its first prime minister not from the CHP. For 10 years, Inonu served as the leader of the opposition. In opposition, the CHP established its youth and women's branches. On the 22nd of June 1953, the establishment of trade unions and vocational chambers was proposed, and the right to strike for workers was added to the party program. The CHP formed an electoral alliance with the Republican Nation Party and Liberty Party for the 1957 election, which was blocked by the DP government. In the lead-up to the elections prepared for 1960, Inonu and CHP members faced regular harassment from the authorities and DP supporters, to the point where he was almost lynched several times. In 1958, the DP mayor of Zile declared martial law and mobilized the gendarmerie to prevent Inonu from conducting a rally in the city. A similar event happened in the city of Kankiri. In 1959, Inonu began a campaign tour that followed the same path he took 30 years ago as a pasha from Uşak to Izmir and ended in victory for the Turkish nationalists. The DP Minister of Interior refused to promise protection to him. In Uşak, a crowd blocked Inonu from going to his podium, and he was hit in the head with a stone. Following his great offensive, he flew to Istanbul, where he was almost lynched by a DP-organized mob on the way to Topkapi Palace. He was also banned from speaking in rallies in Kayseri and Yeşilhisar. Inonu was banned from 12 sessions of parliament. I stop at this point today. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the world's incredible stories. Soon we will publish Part 3. Thank you for watching.